Okay, welcome everybody to I'm going to get the participants up here so I know who all's here. Welcome Tuesday to the July 15th meeting of the single exit multiplex housing tag. Let's go ahead and go through the um, attendance, Dustin, and then I have a couple of introductory comments.
Gotcha. Roger Haringa,
I am here.
Dan Young, I'm not seeing online. John Hall,
Present.
thank you. Joe Mayo, I have as a tentative on attendance. Andy Lorenz,
I'm present, sir.
I have a cannot attend from David Kinley. Jeremy Moore,
Here.
thank you. Jonathan Goldsmith, I'm not seeing online here today. Robert Baglio, not seeing online. Michael Wright, not seeing online. Jesse Bank, not seeing online. Shweta Sinha, I got a message from her earlier. She has a commitment in the beginning and a commitment at the end, so she'll be jumping on, I think, around 1:30 and leaving around 2:30 from that one. She is not in the room at the moment. Mike Messer,
Present.
thank you. David Lynham, not seeing online. Dave Cocott, not seeing online. Spencer Gardner,
I'm here.
thank you. Derek Weigel, not seeing online. Richard Williams,
I'm here.
thank you. John Sue,
Here.
thank you. I see Dan Young is with us now. And with that, we are sitting with a quorum with one extra seat at the moment.
Okay. And is there anybody from the public that would like to recognize themselves?
Yeah, I'm
Recognized.
oh,
Sherry, go ahead.
okay. I'm Hoyt Jeter, Principal Engineer, City of Tacoma.
Hi, Hoyt. Sherry, go ahead.
I'm Sherry Newbold, a residential architect with Live Work Play.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick?
Yes, this is Patrick Hanks with the Building Industry Association of Washington. Thank you.
And Elizabeth?
Yeah, Elizabeth Torsky with Cascade Natural Gas. Thank you.
Okay. Todd?
Todd Byerther, Materials Rep and Chair on the State Building Code Council.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay, I wanted to go through a couple of comments for everybody just to kind of, I think, maybe reset get everybody up to speed on a few things. First, Todd and Dustin and I and Jay from the council were asked to testify, I think it was the middle of last week at the local government committee hearing, I guess, or meeting. And so we did that. One of the topics was to get an update on our progress on the single exit multiplex housing. And so I did my best to provide a summary of where we are at. And I just wanted to tell this group that there was a really good, robust conversation about how the State Building Code Council in general can work and hopefully can work hand in hand with the legislature. And as a part of that, I also wanted to let everybody know that Angela hopped, Todd, Dustin, and I were on a call earlier today with Representative Dewar. Representative Dewar worked on this single exit bill, and she was the sponsor of the multiplex housing bill. And I believe we have some clarity on number levels that we should consider or can consider for the multiplex housing. So I'll let Angela touch on that when we get to the multiplex housing work, but just wanted to let everybody know that those touches with the legislature have happened. And hopefully, I think it'll help clarify our work a little bit. So, third, I wanted everybody to realize John Sue submitted some edits to the where is it, to the multiplex housing work. And John, can I just ask you, I looked through it. Most of it looked editorial, but is that true? Or are there some larger modifications that you made? Can you just kind of summarize for us what that looked like?
Yeah, I think the vast majority was intended to be editorial. Again, there may be some questions as to whether or not they are. That's obviously for discussion.
Okay.
But they're intended to be editorial. There are a number of issues at the bottom that I added that are not addressed by the proposal that my opinion is that we should discuss, at least.
Okay.
Put them on the table and have that discussion.
So when we get to the single exit, that might be the best way for I don't know, we can use those comments to move forward, I think, along with identifying I think our scope. So
they were on the multiplex, not the single exit.
Right. Multiplex. I apologize. I continue to get these two mixed up. So that's what I meant. And then fourth, I just wanted I had a note that at this meeting, we were hoping to hear from the fire department about some of the core requirements that we need to consider for the single exit multiplex. And I think that came out of the idea that the original proposal that came in was crafted to be an appendix that the municipalities would have to go through and consider if and when they adopted it. And it has become clear that it is meant to be a statewide. And so we basically have to get a list of those types of the requirements from the fire department perspective identified, at least what we need to consider and how we need to incorporate that into the code. So that's just kind of an outline. I wanted to again, kind of reset everybody and hopefully we can have another good discussion. I continue to hope, I just want us to continue to make progress. So, and I think we have been, and I think we are. So with that, I am going to move on to agenda item number 2, review and approve the agenda. So I think I would like to have oh, did I hear somebody?
It might just be my computer dinging. I'm not sure.
Okay. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda and then we can have any comments if people have comments or questions about it?
So moved.
Thanks, John.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Richard. So is there any discussion about the agenda? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the agenda is approved. Agenda item number 3, review and approve minutes from the June 26th meeting. Dustin, if you can get those up, they were posted. If you can page through it so that we have a record of it on the recording.
Dustin, there's a small typo right there in that item 4, right at the top of the second page there.
Okay.
Motion, my
I
name.
see you.
Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, I would look for a motion to approve the minutes as modified.
So moved.
Thanks, John. Do I have a second?
Second,
I didn't hear who that was, but
Andy.
thanks, Andy. And any discussion or other comments? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. So the single exit, I'm looking at. So the single exit, I'm curious to hear from those of the folks from the fire contingent. Has there been any work? Was there a sidebar group to discuss the relevant topics that we need to consider?
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd
Yep.
based on the notes from last meeting, it was Dave Cocott and Mike Messer did a volunteer to research some fire department requirements. The kind of four main points we were looking to have some clarity on, which was ladder truck requirements. What is the definition of a professional fire department? Fire flow requirements and community risk assessments. And I had some components within the risk assessment there as well. But those are, by my notes, the kind of main components we were looking to discuss further before moving on with the single exit document.
Okay, I was looking at my notes, Dustin. So what is it what does it mean to be a professional department? There is a WSRB I wrote down, which I'm unfamiliar with, but there are apparently ways to rank or qualify various fire departments. That's kind of the same thing, right? David?
Mike, I'm going to jump in here because this was one of the ad hoc meetings that we have. You weren't able to join us because we keep changing schedules on you. But one of the things that we continue to develop and continue to wrestle with is, first off, what was the intent of the legislation? I'm glad to hear that we actually got some direction back from the proposer. I believe it was Senator Dewar.
Representative Dewar, yes.
Representative Dewar. So if you can provide any more details of that, that would be helpful. The thing that we're continuing to wrestle with is fire protection is really so very locally oriented. It's kind of up to different communities to, are you going to buy more fire departments? Are you going to buy more prevention? Are you going to buy CRR? Exactly what is it that it's going to be very difficult to come up with statewide recommendations for these things. But one of the things that we have considered here is looking to the WSRB, getting some cooperation with them to look at what some of the requirements are from Seattle Fire Department that would be reflected in the language that might be used upon there. We had hoped to come up with some type of a language that says, if your community meets these things, then here's some alternatives that are available to you. But we haven't had that meeting. We've shared some information and had some discussion about it, but we've got another meeting this Thursday to try to hash that out further for us. And that's information you probably didn't know, Mike, because everybody got busy and didn't get back to you after last week. So using some of the information that's in WSRB might be crucial and might be an overall rating. It might be some components of that rating as far as access and so forth. But we'll certainly have a look at that, and it's continuing to develop.
Okay, John? John, you had your hand up. And you took it down.
Sorry. Yeah, in answer to your question and kind of expand a bit on what David Lyman said. the WSRB is the Washington Surveying and Rating Bureau. And every few years, they send out these surveys to building departments and fire departments, I believe. And there's a big long questionnaire that you fill out. What's your staffing like? What's the training required? A whole bunch of other things, and they return back. You return the survey to them, and they come back with a rating of your building department or fire department, and that's what I think that's what we're talking about here. I'm not entirely certain who they are associated with today, but many years ago they were associated with the insurance business side of things.
And can I ask, are fire departments required to submit that information and get rated or not?
I don't know how mandatory it is. I don't know if there is, an RCW says that we have to do this. I know that Seattle had to do it several times over the years that I was there. So I know we did respond to them. So, but I don't know if it was how mandatory they are. It looks like David's got some comments on that.
Okay. David?
Yeah, maybe I can help you out a little bit more. The Survey and Rating Bureau, or Washington Survey and Rating Bureau, does a little bit more than just the queries that are on it. They go out to all the fire departments, fire districts throughout the states periodically. And Mike, maybe you can help me out with this, but it's at least a 3-year cycle. And they establish a rating which determines the cost of insurance, fire insurance, for those properties. So they're very integrally involved. And the score that you get, whether or not you're a number 1 fire department like Seattle, or you're a number 10 or a 5 or somewhere in between, is based upon your ability to do a number of things. One of them is, how much staff you have, what type of engines do you have, what is the rating, ladder trucks, and what's the minimum staffing that you have, what's the minimum response levels, what's your level of protection, and then some of the building permit scores to it. So it is rather cumbersome. But there's a lot of information there that we need to dig down into just a little bit, because as everybody knows, fire protection is incredibly complicated, because there's so many factors come into play on this. But that's a little bit more on Survey and Rating Bureau. They actually have a pretty big role in our fire protection throughout the state, by establishing the ratings that people will pay for the insurance.
And David, can I ask, you said is the rating from 1 to 10?
Yes.
And 10 being the
Worst. Yeah.
The more robust?
No, 10 provides the least protection. And number
Okay,
1,
okay.
which, as I recall, Seattle is the only one in the state that's number 1.
Okay.
Number 1 is the most robust.
So I'm just gonna throw out there, I pulled back up, and Dustin, maybe if you can, I don't know if we want to pull up the RCW, but the recommendations must include considerations for adequate and available water supply, the presence and response time of a professional fire department, and then other provisions necessary to ensure health, safety, and general welfare. I could see us going down that if in a city, if you're WSRB rated 1, 2, 3, we can figure out what that number could or should be. And I think that we would all have to do some investigating of where we thought that would be comfortable, but there it is. Thank you. This is what we are tasked to do, is we have to consider water supply response time. So potentially, and I'm just tossing this out there so people can be thinking about it, is potentially it is one way to meet the fire requirements are if you have a WSRB rating of 3 or higher, or 4 or higher, or whatever that, wherever we want to draw that line, may be an option. And then if in your municipality you do not have a fire department that covers that area that has that rating, then some other, fire flow of X. So I don't know. Just a thought I threw out there, but Wait, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I didn't click on my, yeah, we do the same thing at Tacoma. We also provide the city of Tacoma for Proctor area and stuff, the little local areas, our fire department services. But I know the rating, I don't remember what ours is at Tacoma. I'd have to check with our fire marshal, but I know we went through that rating too. So
Richard.
Yes, can somebody tell me if there's a cost associated to having to, go along with this rating? Cost is passed on to cities.
Staff time to answer the questionnaire, which is again pretty extensive. I remember devoting quite a number of hours to getting the statistics and things that are needed to answer some of the questions.
Is it possible that we would consider making this a mandatory requirement? Or I assume that's what we're talking about now, but do you think that's possible?
I don't know that it would be within our purview to make that a requirement of cities that thou shalt get that rating. My suggestion is if the city of Seattle or the city of Tacoma has gone through that rating, and we can draw a line of what rating is sufficient in our minds, that then they meet the requirement and you don't have to go farther.
Yeah, just a general question about affordability. That's all.
Okay. And I will remind, I mean, the RCW is up there. That is thou shalt, the building code shall convene an advisory group and recommend modifications. So we have to come up with some requirements. It may be challenging because I understand there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of different elements to fighting fires and fire safety, but I think our task is to try to come up with something that makes sense. So wait, go ahead.
I forgot to lower my hand. I'm sorry.
Okay, Todd.
It's a fascinating conversation. Thank you for letting us into this world. If I understand correctly, it's tied to insurance rates. Who would have heartache if someone started proposing to tie this to the regulatory world?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. Todd, can you repeat that?
I was curious who would have heartache if we started tying this to regulation, this rating, or is it already tied to regulation in some manner?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Todd, I think if I understand your question right, I don't believe we would be requiring anybody to get this rating. It is, however, if a municipality has a rating and a rating of a certain level, then your fire department and water flow is sufficient to do the single exit. So it's not, this is the only way for you to qualify is to have your fire department with a rating of, I'll call it 3, whatever that number we arrive at. But if you do have a fire department that has a rating of 3, then you meet the requirements. So Mike, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I got a bunch of them, and just kind of listening to the conversation before I jump back on. As far as cost is kind of irrelevant for the rating. Every fire department in the state of Washington is required to go through the rating process with WSRB. And that's one, if we ever wanted a subject matter expert, for example, Robert Farrell with WSRB to pop on, he can definitely explain it a little bit more in depth. And they rate a fire department regardless of the fire department's cooperation with WSRB. I think Todd brought up the insurance aspect. It is 100% tied to fire insurance premium, but it rates the fire department in 4 different areas. One being water supply, the fire department's ability to respond, emergency communications, and then fire safety. The issue with assigning a number, so for example, a WSRB 3 is it's not necessarily inclusive of the fire department's ability to respond to a single exit. So when we were talking last year in the WABO work group, it just gives an idea of what may be appropriate for a fire department. For example, a 3 fire department has a good possibility they do not have a ladder truck or they're not required ladder truck service. So where if you're in a city and you don't have an aerial device, which is a ladder truck, you're not rated against it. So you get the same 3 that we would get, and we have a ladder truck. So when it comes to this aspect and what the RCW is driving us for with water supply, fire department's ability, it's more writing specific check boxes for, do you have a staff ladder truck 24/7? Do you have water supply at 1500 GPM? It's definitely more prescriptive, just like the fire code or the technical codes would be, than the more subjective number that's used for insurance. So definitely 2 cents, but it's a bigger beast than just the number.
Okay, and I was the one that tossed out setting a number, and if you're suggesting that that may not be the best path forward, then I don't know that, then let's drop that. And we'll define a certain water flow and so.
Yeah, it's easier to write the specific check boxes for the standard to cover or the actual fire department response than using the number. The number was suggested as an idea of start, but now since we're looking at making this something mandatory in the code, we actually need to do check boxes for how the fire department is able to respond.
Okay. Todd, your hand's up, but I want to ask if anybody else has another opinion on that before we leave it. But Todd, go ahead.
Well, I think it's interesting what Mike just said. Maybe if it's not tied to the rating, Mike, are you maybe saying that that's a way you validate a checkbox? Because those checkboxes are already in that rating, so it might be where you look for that information.
Yeah, we can. And again, I could bring up what a rating looks like. If you wanted to inspect it, or Todd, I can send you what ours was and where the different checkboxes are. But for example, for aerial ladder truck or for a ladder truck in our fire department rating, it's not a yes or no, it's points and then a divergence or points lost. So if the agency is required a ladder truck, then the points count. If they're not required a ladder truck, then it's kind of a wash in the rating score. And that's why that number isn't necessarily valid when we're looking at the specific response to a single stair, and what makes it a little bit more difficult. Now, I think I got your email, and I can send you ours, and if you ever want to jump on, I'd be more than happy to kind of walk you through how they do the rating and kind of the difficulties of just setting a number.
Okay. Do I see other hand? I don't see other hands up. Jeremy.
Yes, sir. Thank you. What I heard Mr. Messer say kind of makes sense. In my head, I'm just throwing it out here too, Roger. I'm kind of picturing maybe in this single exit, since it does have to be required, that maybe the requirement is subject to the following fire department criteria being met. And then it's those checkbox items that Mike just talked about, that you have a minimum 1500 GPM flow to the proposed building site, that you have aerial equipment, that you have XXX, and we kind of have to list it like this being mandated in your jurisdiction is subject to the following specific fire department criteria, and then have those items. And if they check all those boxes, then it's required. I don't know, just throwing it out there for thought, but that's what I kind of heard him leaning towards, and it might make sense.
Jeremy, that is exactly what I was thinking, and I would actually like to start a list of what those checkboxes are, but also as the discussion has moved on, a bunch of hands have gone up, so let's continue the discussion. Spencer, you were next.
Yeah, I asked this question last week, and I think the conversation sort of went a different way. So it would be helpful for me to understand if there's other places in the building code where we put contingencies based on fire capabilities, and to what extent can we just use whatever pattern is established elsewhere in the code. In other words, if I want to build a 6-story building in Davenport or somewhere, is there somewhere in the code where it's going to ask me, does the fire department have XYZ capabilities in order for me to do that, or does the code just tend to operate on the idea that you can accomplish whatever you want to accomplish, and sort of leaves the question silent about fire capabilities? If that's the case, this seems like maybe a departure from how the code normally works.
And the next two hands are Ardell and Dan, who can probably answer that question. I will just comment. I have anticipated it is very possible that we have to do some work in the fire code as well. So we do have both the building code and the fire code, and there may be some coordination that has to happen, but Ardell, go ahead.
Spencer, it is absolutely precedent setting to say that these provisions apply if your fire department has X, Y, and Z. In my opinion, if there's others on the call that can give me an example, I'd love to hear it. But the code envisions 2 exits except for the single exits as proposed or as listed in 100634 under the single exit section. And so there are the same limitations that we have on fire departments currently for no ladder truck, exist across the board, but those jurisdictions are still permitted to have single exits up to 3 stories currently. And so one of the things that I just want to offer is that last week we talked about, should the language in the building code point to a fire appendix or somewhere in the fire code where we've made this list of changes of this is what would be required. And what I would suggest is that under 100634, and I have this language, I'm not allowed to drop it into the chat. I don't have that access. Under 100634 single exits, that we add an item that states, subject to the limitations of Appendix X, Y, and Z of the International Fire Code, a Group R2 apartment house occupancy shall be permitted to be served by a single exit in accordance with Appendix Q. And so the reference to both appendices, a new one in the fire code that lists all the requirements for the fire department to allow a single exit, this checkbox, the list of things that Mike just referenced, and Appendix Q in the building code, which then gets charged outright. It doesn't become an optional appendix. It is a mandatory appendix with scoping in the body of the code that sends you to that appendix.
That sounds like a good path forward to me and what I have been thinking. So, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple things I do agree with Ardell on that. I think that's a good idea with the mandatory appendix. The issue I have with using the WSRB, like a 3 or above or something like that, in Kittitas County, my best fire department is Kittitas Valley Fire and Rescue, and there are 4. But in the city of Ellensburg, they do have the fire flow, the ladder truck, that kind of stuff. And when you're looking, even in a district, you can meet the requirements or not meet the requirements depending on where you put it inside that district. And I think something like Ardell said, where you put it into an appendix, a mandatory appendix, whatever, that states if you meet ABC, whatever, you can do this. Otherwise, if you don't have the water flow, you shouldn't be building something anyway that, and the water flow tables are based on, the size of the building. So putting just 1500 GPM doesn't work. You would just say, because it's already in the code that if you have a building of type A, B, or type, whatever the type is and the square footage, it tells you exactly what your fire flow is. So I think we have to be very careful that we can use the code that is available without changing that. We have to be very careful on that because it already lists certain things. So, but I like the idea of an appendix. So those are my thoughts.
Dan, we can take the WSRB off the table. It's what happens when you get a structural engineer talking about fire requirements. We don't need to, if that's not a good idea, let's not do that. Yeah. And I also agree with, that is the reason for both the single exit and the multifamily that are multiplex housing is having it in an appendix avoids having to mess up other parts of the code. And it keeps it all okay. You have one piece in the code that directs you to this appendix Q and appendix whatever in that fire code. That's the only time those appendix are referred to, and then that all of the requirements are in the appendix. So again, I think if that makes sense as from a process perspective. So wait.
Sorry, yeah, sorry about that. I got it on mute real quick. Yeah, I just looked up, we're a class 3, just to let you know. I just wanted to make sure, because I know we went through it, so I talked to our guy, so just wanted to let you know.
Okay, John.
But it's thinking that Ardell makes a good point that this would be precedent setting to put this restriction in here, that currently under the building code, you're allowed to build a 6-story podium building with 2 exits anywhere in the state. You may be limited by your zoning code height limit, but the current building code allows a 5-story podium building everywhere in Washington state. And so putting this limit on it seems contradictory to the intent of the base code language.
Okay. And I will just relay in my conversations with Representative Dewar, there's recognition that we are trend setting. You know, we're the first state that's going to go through this, and I'm sure that the rest of the country will look at it. So just goes to emphasize the work we're doing is really important. And the big motivation is there's a housing crisis everywhere. So this is, at least from the legislature's perspective, this is the way that, one of the ways that they are hoping to make building housing less expensive. So Todd, Mike, your hand is up. I'm not sure if you're still looking, but I think Todd is next. So
I'm trying to better understand, to Dan's point, this is tied to certain areas that might meet requirements. And either they are tied to a section like Ardell's proposing, or they're not in there at all. They're just left to the local jurisdiction. How and who establishes that map? I assume that it has to be tied to a specific service map or a zoning overlay to enforce. Is that true?
now I'm not sure that I understand your question, nor the answer. Mike, go ahead.
I heard your comment. No, I did put it back up. So Spencer brought up a good point. Y'all been hitting on the stories. So just wanted to kind of give a quick explanation of base code and assumptions made. So you've already brought up, and I think Ardell confirmed, we can do what, 3-story single exit. It's all good to go. Again, you got to remember when we're looking at risk management, you can take an administrative approach, an engineering approach, or you can provide people personal protective equipment. Basic risk management. In the 3-story approach, every fire department has an engine. Every fire department has a 35-foot ground ladder. 35-foot ground ladder at 70 degrees gets us to 30 feet. So 30 feet is roughly your 3-story building. It's when you go over that 30 feet that you see aerial requirements kick in. So the fire code has already set precedent that over 30 feet, if adopted, aerial requirements are required, assuming the fire department has a aerial apparatus. So that's the transition that we're going through from what the base code allows to where now we're saying that single story can go up to the total of 6 stories and not be a high rise. Is now the expectation isn't that the fire department's running around with just ground ladders, but the fire department is now expected to have that aerial device that can be the secondary exit in an emergency out of an ERO window. So just kind of to set that out there because it's come up a couple times, and I thought Spencer did make a really good point on what has happened. So yes, precedent setting for us to actually come back and say, yes, you have to have a ladder truck, but the why is always important, and we got to start with the why. So here's the why that becomes precedent setting and needed. So I just wanted to comment on that and really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you. I just had a quick question. In general, if something in the code were to be tied by a fire department's rating, how often do those ratings go down? Because I would envision that a lot of times fire departments, maybe they're a 5 wanting to go to a 4 or a 3 wanting to go to a 2. How often do they get derated? Because the problem if we made the requirement to that rating and then a fire department got derated, would now that building be vulnerable?
Well, again, if you're talking about the rating, I think we've moved away from it, but it is a valid question. If a fire department has aerial equipment and this is allowed to, you build a 6-story single exit, and then that fire department the aerial equipment goes away from budget cuts or whatever, then what happens? And I don't know the answer to that. So, David?
Thank you. That's some exactly what I was going to say on that is we have in my county, we have had fire departments that have lost some of their rating, or they've lost rating in many of the areas or some of the areas that they have. And it's for those type of things that you consider now is, yes, today we could afford to put in the aerial apparatus, but we've had departments that have had to stand down their aerial apparatus because of staffing issues. They're all government agencies are really tied to limitations on increasing their tax revenue. So that's why it's some of the things that make this so very complicated, because you could easily have one of these buildings at a point in time when your city met a rating, and then the city, using their elected representatives, have decided that something else is more important, and refunded different departments. And they could lose the ability to respond with aerial apparatus. It's not one of those things that's set forever. And that's, some of the difficulties of having a statewide compulsory language is, the local people may have different ideas about how they want to spend their resources. But that's exactly that's a great point, because you can lose that. You can lose that rating and it can go back down.
Well, again, I want to reiterate, I think we've moved away from the rating, but the aerial apparatus is a valid question, although I think right now if the building code allows you to build a 10-story building, it is based on the assumption that you have aerial equipment. And so if that aerial equipment goes away, you are faced with the same question or concern. So, White?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that. It does change. It is through the insurance commissioner stuff, how they rate it. Our Tacoma fire guy that I talk with and stuff, at 2000, we had one rating, and then it changed because of fire departments, because of voting and things like that, or budgets, they got closed. So then it changed the rating. Just thought I'd let people know that the rating does change based on response times, all these other criteria. So just because it is at one time doesn't mean it'll be the same reading, 10 years from now.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, just to, I agree with you, what you said earlier, Roger, that this is not just a problem with the rating, and, we're going to get away from the rating, it sounds like. So, but even if we develop this checklist in the fire code appendix, and what happens if you lose some of that capability, right? That's gonna be a problem that we'll have to face at some point, because maybe that community had the capability that with those checkpoints, but they lost that capacity at some point for whatever reason. Your fire flow, your pipes are old and they got rusted up and things like that. Now they can't deliver the pressure. I mean, what do you do with that? Those are existing problems that we have today.
Yeah, John, do you agree that I was going to ask you a question, then you made the statement at the end. Those are existing problems that we have today.
Yeah.
That won't be specific to the single exit going up to 6 stories. So, Spencer.
Yeah, this is really good discussion and helps me, I think, to formulate my thoughts. I guess my concern, understanding that what we're talking about is potentially precedent setting, it almost feels like it's a little bit out of scope. I understand we're required to consider the fire impacts, and I think we absolutely need to do that. I just worry that we are opening up conversations that go well beyond what we're tasked with here, specific to single stair, in terms of, I'm hearing questions about how would this apply if I build a 10-story building and then the ladder trucks are gone in 5 years or whatever. Personally, it just doesn't seem like it's within the scope. So I'm struggling a little bit to see how we can keep it within scope, and still meet the requirement to consider the fire issues.
Thank you, Spencer. I'm trying to do that too. Richard.
Yeah, Roger, I would just add that, you know, I know that we're not setting any precedents with this, that jurisdictions have to deal with this currently with large buildings and whatnot, but we are potentially adding to the, you know, to the supply of this. So we do have to be mindful of it and figure out the best way to do it because, you know, the goal here is to add a lot of buildings to the mix, right?
I think the overall goal is to make it easier to build housing inexpensively. So, John?
Yeah, I just want to respond a little bit to the concerns about setting a precedent on the fire side. We're absolutely setting a precedent on the single exit side too. So I don't think that that's necessarily an argument against trying to decide what's going to be good for safety.
I agree, and that's been reiterated to me from Representative Dewar multiple times. So, Ardell.
I don't think this is gonna fly, but I had been struggling with, is this really appropriate in the fire code? Or would it be more appropriate in here are the provisions to consider, again, like what we have at the start of the appendix, and put that in an RCW? Because that's policy setting of like, if, you know, and it's not something that we can work on with the legislature with. I think that's gonna get kicked out as like, no, that's that idea, this needs to be in the code. But again, because of the sort of unique nature of how we're scoping it based on if you have X, Y, and Z, like in the, you know, if your jurisdiction meets this criteria, then thou shalt have, you have to have the single exit provision adopted in your jurisdiction. Like that, I agree. This is a tough one. I don't know that it belongs in the fire code appendix, and that's, but it is another option would be to put it into an RCW.
Don?
Same concept, I doubt. Instead of an RCW, is there any reason it couldn't be in WAC and just through rulemaking, but not in the code? I mean, our codes are WAC in Washington, but we also could have rulemaking authority to make other WACs, I believe.
I don't know.
I mean, that kicks it a little bit out of the scoping of this tag, right? It's like, no, you guys do the building code thing. And then the fire code gets pushed, or the WAC or the RCW or the rule. It buys you time, but you still have to come up with the technical criteria either way.
Let me punt my comment. I think it's Richard Gacy. R. Geisky. You are unmuted, but we can't hear you. Rich.
How about now?
There we go.
Sorry about that. I moved my docks from one to the other, and it's that darn technology. I think, you know, right now, the way the current code is, and I think Mike said it really well, is the minimum level of safety for a single exit, because that second exit is being provided by a ground ladder fire service, is very, very appropriate. You know, the code then says when we get taller than those typical ground ladders, then we start having that second exit that's built into the building to get that extra height. When we keep going up above that 6 stories, and then we start going, you know, into more fire resistant types of construction, again, because we're increasing the hazard, we're adding more and more you know, people to structures. And really what this legislation has done is it's saying we're going to remove one level of safety out of the model codes and put that requirement on the local jurisdiction to provide that equal level of safety, because we don't want to build less safe structures just because they're more cost affordable. We're trying to find that balance point between the two. But I mean, if we're basing this on the response capabilities of the fire department, basically what we're doing is we're taking the cost of those stairs and putting it on the fire department to buy a ladder truck. And so it is very precedent setting, and it's very difficult. And we're seeing, something similar in the middle housing of how do you address all the middle housing stuff, without going through all the development process and that under the guise of the affordability. So I think it's a really difficult question to answer because it's not coming through that consensus code of what is safe, what is the history of fire loss, what is the history of death within buildings, and where does that risk really lie? So this is a difficult question, and I think it is precedent setting for both, right? To put that local requirement on the jurisdictions to determine, well, what is safe for the state. That's a big lift.
Rich, I think what I believe we need to head towards is, okay, at 3 stories you have the ladder and the single exit. What are we, so to go from 4 levels to 6, 4 stories to 6, we have, I'm under the assumption that we're going to require that there's aerial apparatus available. If that is not equivalent to exiting out a window with a regular ladder, and you might forgive me, I don't know the proper terms, but if we are not comfortable with that provides a level of safety, I certainly think that might require, okay, you need to have a higher fire rating for your walls or floors or doors, or what's the fire rating of that single exit. I certainly think that's on the table, but as far as just an approach of, okay, let's, we know that we're comfortable at 3 stories. When you go to 6 stories, what is it? What are we losing, and how can we accommodate that in another way? So, Patrick?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think building codes should try to serve or replace the purpose of zoning requirements. And sometimes in codes, especially the IBC, you have requirements based off risk maps and risk categories, but the code itself is universal, has universal requirements for the different categories. It's not based off the resources of local governments. I sort of agree with some of the points that Rich was making, that by doing something like the fire department ratings or things like that, that you could unintentionally put pressure on local fire departments to expand in ways that they might not need to or were planning to, and that could then push those resource costs onto developers and builders, which just ends up indirectly increasing housing costs, which kind of I think defeats the purpose of this whole enterprise. So I'm glad to hear that the group's kind of moving away from that. But I thought I'd offer some perspective. Hopefully the tag finds helpful. I think there's a lot of really smart people on this call with lots of great professional background, and there's lots of good points being made that I think will ultimately end up being helpful. But having open-ended discussion can really just end up soaking up a lot of time. And I think it would be helpful. I found it helpful as I've now worked through some code work groups and code meetings to quickly get results done and be mindful of people's time, is to have a really clear agreed upon deliverable or final product with a clear deadline of when that needs to be done. Schedule or have a basic understanding of how many meetings you have to accomplish that final product, and how much time per meeting you're going to spend working on that, and then identify the areas of agreement and the areas where consensus needs to develop. And there's always going to be varying levels of that, but then it allows you to just stay laser focused on each meeting of, okay, here's what we need to do, here's what we need to get through in this meeting, and then just focus on making progress. Because I could easily see there's already been quite a few meetings, and I could see a lot of meetings just kind of get soaked up with open discussion, when I think it'd be more useful of everybody's time to have maybe a clear understanding of what the areas are that need to be worked on and what we're going to do in each meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Ardell.
I'm happy to offer that a breakdown of topics that at least in the WABO development of this, where we did exactly that. It took us 17 meetings to get to the proposal that you see here. And the sort of grouping of proposals was the main overall scoping, the general scoping, the exiting protection, so egress protection from the point you hit the corridor to the point you hit exit discharge, communicating occupancies, stair pressurization and hoistway pressurization or protection, the fire protection, the Washington State Association of Fire Marshals and WABO. So the provisions that you see in the preamble where we did discuss WSRB, NFPA 1710 and 1720. And there's another one, CPSC. I forget what that stands for, Mike. And then the last, I'm happy to give you a breakdown of potential topics for meetings, Roger, if you want.
I don't know the best way to move forward. I mean, I think that we had talked about coming back with a list of things that need to be considered in some way from a fire perspective. And I have heard conversations about that information, whether it goes in gets added to this appendix or it gets added to an appendix in the fire code. But I did not hear anybody with major pushback of having charging language in the building code that directs you to both the fire appendix and the appendix Q. So, and Ardell, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think we also heard David Lynham say that there was a subcommittee working on it. They just hadn't met yet. So Cocott, Messer, and Lynham had offered to come up with that list for potentially the appendix. And is that work that can happen and then come back and come to a later meeting?
And that's what I was hoping. I think does this group agree that a request from that work group that they head towards putting information into a standalone fire appendix for consideration? Because once they're going to start discussing what the topics are and how we can resolve them, or should they just be topic items? So that's question number one in front of us, I think, is should the information be in a fire appendix? Question number two, what are the issues that need to be included? And I've written down ladder truck or aerial apparatus capabilities, water flow, response times. Are there other things that needs to address? Mike?
There we go. Had to unmute. Yeah, so real quick, I've been going back and forth with David on here, and then just sent Ardell an email request for some Seattle special information. But the cool thing about everything we're trying to do, the fire code already provides for between Appendix B, C, and D. All we're going to do is bring forward the applicable requirements and write them in for that charging language for you. So as soon as we get a little bit more information on average single stair building, then I can start applying what Appendix B, C, and D already say. So this language is already codified within the fire code itself, and all we're going to do is add it to the precursor or that preamble of what these buildings need for the fire department to respond appropriately. And hopefully that will help and be some really good consideration for the group here in the very near future.
Okay. So are we ready then to, it sounds like, or I'm going to suggest that we move on from the single exit and allow that group. I think that I heard they're meeting on Thursday. I know a few folks are on that group that are here today to heard the discussion to move away from the WSRB to have the checklist. And I still would, let's wait until the next meeting and figure out what that checklist looks like, what the items are. that sound okay with everybody? I also will just put it out there. I hate going 3 hours without a break. This would be us moving into the multiplex housing. Is it worth doing a 5-minute break now before we jump into the multiplex housing? Or not?
Works for me.
Okay. I see a hand, a thumbs up. So let's take a break until 2:05, and then we will dig into the multiplex housing. So I am waiting for Dustin to get back. Maybe I need to allow us a 10-minute breaks rather than 5-minute.
We're back live with the recording and everything, so we're ready to rock.
Recording has started?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Shweta, I've seen your hand up.
Hi there. I just wasn't able to join at the beginning, so I wanted to let everyone know I just joined.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Mhm.
And I just wanted to ask, so Ardell, going back to the single exit, Ardell has a list of topics that were considered for the single exit in the WABO proposal. Are people interested in seeing that list? Richard?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Also wondering, oh, go ahead, Roger. You was going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I also wondering if, well, take that list and start plugging it into our WABO single exit provisions and see what we agree and don't agree with by each category. Come up with a document at the end of that process. It seems like it's pretty straightforward. I'd be in favor of something along those lines.
Ardell, are you back? I think it was Richard that just spoke. Richard, my assumption is that was the product that they came out with in considering all of those that WABO had was the appendix that we have in front of us.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is we went through that process. I understand that we as meaning WABO, but I'm just to the extent that we either vote on this WABO proposal or we look for ways to modify it. If we were going to modify it, it seems like one approach could be a similar process that we undertook at the WABO level, which is to look at these categories and see if okay, do we agree with what WABO came up with, or do we need to change certain aspects? If that's not the case, if we're just looking for a straight up and down vote of the WABO proposal, then okay. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think the WABO proposal we've agreed is the working document, but it has always been the assumption is that we would go through each of the items in the WABO in the working proposal that we have, and we would say, vote yes or no on each of those.
Well, I guess, so that's what I'm saying. If we went through a similar process that we went through at Wabo, it seems like that we've already done that, so it could be constructive. We could do a similar, take a similar approach using the information that's already in front of us. We'd be modifying, not creating it from scratch, but the process would be similar. It seems like that would be reasonable to me.
Okay. And I am sensitive to figuring out what the best process is. So I don't like to sit in meetings any more than anybody else. So if we think that that's the best way to do it, I'm certainly comfortable. So I will, Ardell is still on, but not asking. I will reach out to Ardell and we will have that list distributed. And, you know, maybe that's what we start doing on the, well, what I would like to do for the agenda, and Dustin, if we can write this down so I don't forget, is I would like to hear from the group, the fire group of, I'm going to call it the checklist of things that we need to incorporate in some way, shape, or manner. And then beyond that, if we can take that list that Ardell can provide us, and then we will start going through that. So that's what our plan will be for the next meeting. Hopefully. Okay, single exit, I'm sorry, multiplex housing.
Oh, that's right. Yes, you did. I'm available in like Friday lunch.
Shweta, can you, there we go. So Angela, are you on, and would you like to summarize the conversation that we had?
Sure. As it pertains to the multiplex. So basically, we were discussing kind of getting some clarification on the definition of multiplex from the legislation. And what we had gotten last week from Representative Dewar was that she was envisioning that this code proposal would include the possibility of having 6 basically flats stacked on top of each other. So a 6-story multiplex building in the IRC. So we sat down with her this morning to kind of discuss how that would work, or if it could work. And after going through a number of things, basically, again, she's interested in making incremental moves forward, at the very least. And she understood that basically I think, what did she say? She's not looking to make things more difficult for us. And so in doing that, she has said that the 3-story limit is acceptable, and does make sense at this point. And then we also discussed the egress and how we should move to include the interior egress portions, so the stairs and the corridors and things like that, as an option. And then we also discussed that there is currently a change coming through for the energy codes, both the residential and the commercial, that would allow multiplex structures to choose which energy code they would want to use, as far as which would be cheaper or more beneficial for them. And so those were the main points we hit, as far as just trying to tie things in. But the interest is still to lower the cost of construction to these 3-story, 6-unit structures. Did I miss anything? Roger?
No, I think that's a good summary.
Okay.
Richard, go ahead.
Okay, me one more time. Is it the intent of the legislation to allow for a 6-story single exit building to be constructed out of the IRC?
No, the structure, the single exit, yes, but it would be a single exit in a 3-story building.
So this 6-story stack would have to have 2 exits.
The 6-story stack is not going to be included in the IRC. What was determined was that for the actual IRC, because the entire code is based on the premise of a 3-story maximum, because what I explained was what we would be creating is a 6-story multiplex that could be in the IRC, while a 4-story single family residential would be in the IBC. So we'd just be creating way too much of a conflict. So basically, as she said, the original intent, she had envisioned that it would be possible, but based on things that we discussed on just what the IRC is and what it's based on, capping it at 3 stories. So what we had been working, the premise we'd been working on, where the height limit for a multiplex in the IRC is 3 stories and 6 units. So yeah, that's it.
Shweta.
Yeah, so I guess I had a question, Angela. I was wondering, so when you say that there would be a change in the code that would let multiplexes choose between the residential and commercial code, depending on what is more beneficial, it's still for a narrow band of projects, right? Like projects which straddle both of those, correct? It's not like it's all across the board.
Only multiplex buildings, which are this appendix. So which are these 3-story,
these
up to
3-story,
6 units.
okay, yes.
Just these multiplexes designed in the IRC will have the opportunity to choose either
commercial or residential energy code. Yes, thank you.
And Sherry, you can fill us in because I think you're the one that proposed the change to the energy code.
That's right. That proposal that I made to allow these 3-story up to 6 unit interior access or exterior access, but it includes interior access multiplex buildings. That proposal passed the residential energy code tag a couple of weeks ago. And so those structures will be allowed to choose either the residential energy code or the commercial energy code once it goes through that entire process, but it did pass the tag.
So what I take away from those two things is as we are writing the document, and maybe Dustin, I see you sharing the topics list. If you can, what I would like to do is next jump to John Sue's comments, and we can go through John's, he can summarize for us. And I think it is based on the approved working document that we have. So, but the two things that I think we will need to do is, number one, in the definition of, in the scope, whether it's in part 1 or part 2, that's in the residential code or in section XX 101, we're going to need to make sure that we clarify that it is 6 units up to 3 stories.
Yeah.
So there's some just definition of the problem, but at least we understand a little bit more about what the intent of the legislation is. And then we will need to keep our eye on correlation with the energy code. I know that wherever the reference is in there, we'll need to just make sure that we aren't doing something that is in conflict with the sections of the changes to the energy code. Sherry, would it be, well, or Dustin, you have that proposal that just passed. It might be good for you to distribute that to this group, just so we can see the nuts and bolts of how that, what that looks like, so we understand it. So post it or distribute it to the tag, so we're all aware of it. With that, John, you've gone through, and I think the best way for us to do this is for you to walk us through your edits. And then I know there is a list of questions on the bottom that we can then dig into.
Sure. So just as a preface, if you click on the link that was in the on the web page, what you'll get is a copy that shows shows all the doesn't show the track changes version. If you hit edit a copy up at the top of the page, I was just looking at that. You hit the edit a copy, you'll see the track changes version. And Dustin had the track changes version up before, so that's probably the best one to go with right now. And I'll apologize. I converted the PDF to Word, and there are some artifacts I kind of carried forward that I couldn't get rid of. So there may be some weird things in here. Essentially, I tried to go through and make it clearer. And so most of the changes, as we talked about earlier in the meeting, are pretty much editorial. There are, I think, during the break, I went through and I think there are 3 substantive changes that I'm suggesting in there. So besides the list of issues that we should talk about and decide. So if you go to, I don't know how much we need to go into the exact wording. Roger, I think we can, again, I'll say there may be one or two that someone may not agree is editorial, and we can stop and talk about that. Again, I think most of this is just code language. You know, and the only question is, for instance, on XX 101.1, item 2, do we need to say any portion of the building, or is the just use of any, you know, do we really need to say that? Do we just say, can we just say use of the buildings limited to residential use only, and just leave it at that? That's kind of a minor point in my mind. Let's see. A lot of it is things like code language, you know, substituting are permitted to be or shall be permitted to be as necessary instead of may. The codes kind of frown on may because the way it's interpreted, it means may or may not. So it's not necessarily as clear. The first one, though, if you can scroll down to 102.1, item 1 there. This is hopefully not controversial, but it is substantive in that I'm pointing to a table of assemblies in the IBC that are kind of prescriptive. How do you build a 1-hour fire resistance rating assembly? And so as it was written, you either had to test them or you had to do an analytical method. And these other assemblies should be equally available for people to use. Other people also use what's called the Gypsum Association Manual that has a lot of these fire resistance rated assemblies in them, or UL also has a bunch in their catalogs. So those are all available or should be available. But I just pointed to the section in the IBC, and they can go look at the table and find something that works for them. Let's see. In continuity in 102.1.1, I think this is the intent, but we're talking about what I'm focusing on are the rated assemblies that are separating dwelling units need to be the ones that extend to the walls and everywhere else. You could have rated interior bearing walls, depending on the type of construction, and those don't necessarily have to go all the way to the exterior walls and the roof. So I'm focusing on just the dwelling unit separations there. Someone might consider that to be substantive.
John, can I go back?
Yes.
I do have a question about the 101.1 number 2.
Okay.
And as I think about it, maybe it makes sense, but we are saying that in these buildings, it can only be residential, that there can't be, it's not a ground floor commercial space, that's in the building code, right?
Yeah. That's a mixed use. Yeah.
What about, well, you say no common use areas. Does this eliminate a common laundry or something like that? And if the answer is yes, then, but I'm just trying to understand it.
As it was written, yes, that's what I think would be. That's that again. This is not my proposal. I'm commenting on the other someone else's proposal. But yes, that's how I would read that. Is that you could not have a common laundry, you could not have a lobby area with lots of seating and things like that. Meeting space, whatever, a common kitchen. Yeah.
I think I'm fine with that, although it starts me thinking, so.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, that's again, that's what's being proposed there, and I'm just not changing that at this stage. Okay. Dustin, if you could scroll down to 102.1.2. Right below, yeah. So supporting construction there, that is a new section that could be again considered to be substantive. Right now, what I'm proposing is basically what's consistent with the rest of the code, is that if you've got a fire rated assembly, it's got to be supported by something with the equal fire rating. So if you got a fire rated floor, fire resistance rated floor, the supporting construction, so bearing walls holding it up, would also have to be rated. Let's see. Similarly, in 102.1.4, the penetration section, I'm focusing on if you're penetrating fire resistance rated walls or floor assemblies. To me, that was probably the intent, but this again just clarifying that. And again, we're only talking about the ones where you separate dwelling units. We don't care if you're penetrating a exterior wall or an interior bearing wall. That does not part of the unit separation. Let's see. The other couple ones there on the screen are just language changes. Let me see what the next one is. Let's go to 103.1.5. And by the way, for everyone's information, I mean, I'm basically doing, this was an attempt to just make comments on the base document as we were sort of instructed to do. So that's where all this comes from. Okay, so let's see. I want 103.1.5. Okay, slip resistant surface. I'm clarifying that it's not the main thing we're concerned about here is the means of egress from the dwelling unit to the public way. So we're not trying to regulate what's inside the unit, because technically in the code, everything's part of the means of egress. So if you're in a bedroom, you're trying to get out of your unit, that's all part of the means of egress. So I'm just limiting the application of that section to once you leave the dwelling unit. Let's see. The next one is in 103.1.8.1, open side there.
Hey, John.
Yes.
So is a means of egress not a common use area?
It's not, we would not view it as exactly the same thing. Common use, okay, I think most people would not capture it in that, what's called common use. And I think we've used that language in other places in the IRC. I'd have to go back and look at it.
Yeah, I just would, that section, the one that I went and talked about, 101.1 number 2.
Yeah, understood.
I think, and maybe it's just common uses other than
I think it's
something. So anyway,
yeah, I don't think most folks would interpret when you're restricting common use areas. I don't think they would interpret the means of egress because that's required.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, open side there. What I put in here, this is a substantive change. All that basically what constitutes an open side. If you've got an exterior exit stairway, and I know that based on what Angela said earlier today, that we're going to have to start considering interior corridors and things like that, and interior stairs and how to protect those. But this is purely what's an exterior exit stairway, and since it's not really defined in the residential code, what I brought this across is the minimum size of openings and an exterior stair from the building code. So this is, I don't know if it's word for word, but it's the same requirement. So you have to have openings of a certain size so that the stair vents any smoke and heat. And that's the point of that one. Let's see. I believe that's the yeah, that I believe that's the last of the substantive changes. Everything else again is hopefully editorial. That this change in the section in 106.1 is just fix the pointer. And then I do have these general comments and questions that are not addressed in the proposal. And I think Roger, you mentioned it at the last meeting. This proposal does not address attached multiplex buildings, and we need to say either it's allowed or it's not. And if you do it, if we do allow it, then what's the requirements? Are there, do we put a firewall in there? Do we put a fire barrier? What are the fire separation requirements? And then would there be a maximum number of attached buildings? Can you take these 6 packs, and reproduce them indefinitely with just a, with whatever separation between them? That's something we have to decide. I didn't opine one way or the other on it. And then structural issues, don't know how that's going to kind of fall out. Certainly the lateral force frame requirements have a certain basis, and they were assuming certain size of buildings and certain configurations. And then the question is, okay, from a structural standpoint, if your walls stack up, your lateral, your shear walls and things, no big deal. But if they start offsetting, then how much can you offset them and things like that? Some of that is allowed in the IRC, and it's a matter of saying, okay, is that okay? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but that's not, again, just not addressed here. Some of the area limitations may help because, again, the braced wall provisions in the IRC are predicated on a certain size and a certain distance between walls. So that's part of that question. Something flashed through my head, but can't think of it right now. In other jurisdictions where they've done something similar to this, they have just said structural design, go to the IBC, get an engineer and design it. I don't know if we need to do that, but it depends on configurations, right? And once you start throwing interior corridors in there, that may complicate things. So don't know. Again, the IRC is predicated on you either got a single family or you got townhouses. Townhouses have regular walls, between every unit, and those are going to be your shear walls in one direction, and then we figure out what to do in the other direction. Single family houses, there's again some limitations on that. So if we start doing multiplex, then we just need to look at that. Soundproofing, it's in the IRC. There's an appendix there. It's not adopted at this point in the IRC and the WAC. And it's not a life safety issue. It is a livability issue. And so you could argue that In the IRC, under the current IRC, it's not really needed because by default, your 2-hour separations or whatever you use for townhouse separations is going to be more probably meet your sound attenuation requirements. But now if you're starting to stack people on top of, stack units, the question is, do you start needing to have some sound, attenuation between units? And again, that's a question. If you do add it, then a lot of those assemblies that meet the requirements for sound have lightweight concrete or gypcrete on the floors, and that will add weight. And so that adds to your seismic weight that's not accounted for in the calculations I came up with the brace wall panel. So something, again, to consider. And then I have some questions about some of the sections there. How do we justify the 8,000 square feet? Where did that come from? And some other ones like that. I don't know how much detail you want to go into on that, Roger, at this point. So people, this is available, excuse me, on the website, and people can look at those. I think those are, excuse me, again, just points of discussion.
Okay. You've got me starting to think about the structural things, but
I guess Roger just thinking of structural too, and maybe we're okay with that. Are we okay with the reduced live loads in the IRC versus the IBC floor loads?
well, without getting into any of the details, certainly now that we've limited it to 3 stories, we're not talking about 4, 5, or 6.
Yeah.
Stretching, let's say, in the IRC from 2 to 3 is easier to accomplish than going to 4, 5, and 6. So
yeah. That's why these are questions and not this. So I'm not saying we should do one thing or the other.
Yeah. So what I would I'm going to assume that all of the editorial edits make sense to me, and I guess what I would ask is we go through one by one the potentially controversial issues with the hope that we basically adopt John's edits to the working document.
Roger,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, may I suggest that provisionally adopt them, and because it's only been posted since whenever it was yesterday. So allow people to look at them and make sure they agree those are editorial or not.
I think all of it is provisionally. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're going to get to the end of this, we're going to get to, okay, we're okay that this full document. What I struggle with, and maybe this is just my own, is we get these documents with 15 different colored edits, and trying to actually read what's still there is difficult. So at some point, I like to say accept changes, and okay, this is the new working document. So you said that there are 3 potentially. Can you go back to 102.1? Is that where you started doing you said it might be controversial?
Substantive, not necessarily controversial, just there are changes made to what was originally proposed.
So I'm going to ask, and knowing that this is provisional, but does anybody have a heartache with the modifications to 102.1? And I don't see any hands. Going down, page down, the continuity, that was just an editorial, I believe.
Yeah.
The
supporting construction was the next one.
Yeah. So I'm curious, John, that is not in the residential code right now. And I could see that with only 2 floors. It's a little bit less of an issue, but with 3, it becomes more
Well,
important.
it's more the stacked units issue. You don't have fire separations in townhouse, how should I say, horizontal fire separations in townhouses and single families.
Yeah.
So now that we are putting flats on top of each other, you have a fire rated floor. Now you got to support it with something.
Makes sense. And I don't see any hands raised, so if anybody has concerns about these, please jump in. Going down, when was the next one?
Open side, 103, 181.
Yeah, I don't.
That
That
one there.
one's pretty straightforward to me. I don't know that, again, I'm giving the people the opportunity to comment on it, knowing that we also are gonna have to figure out how we do interior exits, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's gonna be separate.
yeah,
This is just about exterior stairs.
yeah. Okay. And that's it, other than the comments.
Yes.
Okay. Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to scroll back up to the first line of the 302, and I might have jumped in at a later point. So John, you might have already explained the reference there, but it was the prescriptive fire resistant rated assemblies in section 721 of the International Building Code.
Yeah.
That's in addition to tested accordance with the other sections that are in the residential code. So can you just go back over why you felt that was important to add there?
Yeah, because right now, if you just, well, as this was originally proposed, you either had to have a test, ASTM E119 UL 263, or you had to do this analytical method. And
right, okay.
So this recognizes that there are what I would call pre-approved assemblies that are in the code that you can just pick one of those off the catalog and say, I'm going to do that.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, okay. And this is just like one of the following. So it'd be either, one or 2 or 3. Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
All right.
And can I clarify that they are pre-approved in the IBC? So even though you're looking out of the IRC, you can go to this table in the IBC and pick this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Well, go ahead, Spencer.
Yeah, just I guess a quick question, since I'm not very familiar with the IBC, and since the goal here is to address cost concerns, I guess it might just be helpful for me to understand what those fire resistance rated assemblies are. And I can go look at the actual document and work with my building department to get more information. But if you can just summarize quickly, is it just like additional layers of drywall or something along those lines?
Essentially, there's a whole raft of different ways of arranging them, but just essentially it's the most basic one is a layer of 5/8 gyp on one side, type X, a layer of 5/8 type X gyp on the other side, nailed at certain intervals or screwed at certain intervals, whatever. There may be some other things that may have some insulation in there or something else. That's kind of the basic.
That makes
And
sense.
the others may. Yeah.
Thank you.
Jonathan.
So if we're going to include 721, do we want to also look at including the calculated fire resistance for 722?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that. How much more do we want to, point on that? We, we could do that too as well. Yeah, there's just for people's information, it's another very long section that you can calculate your fire resistor ratings by adding up certain pieces of what you have. So if for wood frame in particular, a piece of 5/8 type X is worth 40 minutes and the studs are worth X minutes, and you know, you add it up, and if you come up to more than an hour, then you're okay. I mean, that's certainly possible. You could add that as another option. I hadn't intended to necessarily
Yeah.
limit it, but again, we were starting with testing or analyze, so I just added this other piece.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, quick question for John. And John, I'm sorry if I missed it. You said it earlier. What's the occupancy type going to be? And then what is the intent of the ownership for the units?
That's not addressed here because the IRC doesn't have occupancies.
Mm-hmm. So it's
So
going to be so straight IRC building, no IBC implication.
I think that's the intent. I mean, the intent
Cool.
is that you can build this thing out of the IRC. We do say it has to be residential apartment use only. I think that's in number 2 there.
Yeah, so the apartment type, and I know this is kind of the other sticking point, this is all fire protection related questions for how we view the world. Then what's the ownership? Are we looking at property management? Are we looking at individual ownership of the units? Do you know? Or is there anybody else who could answer that?
The legislation didn't address that. So I think we're assuming you can be a condo, it can be a apartment.
Gotcha. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is when you start calling out the 13R systems, that's the commercial residential system for like an R2 apartment, or yeah, an R2 apartment complex. And we get into some issues when we have individual ownership with those. So that's where I'm kind of going with the occupancy type, and then what the intent of ownership is.
Yeah, let me go back. I mean, what's proposed right now, and maybe Jonathan between Jonathan and Angela, this was their proposal, so maybe
Okay.
they can explain. But it does say residential apartment use only, so would not include condos.
Yeah, so just real quick on the fire side, and for any of the folks who proposed, and this is something we could write into the language, if it is intended for a property management, so one single owner, then we would want to go to the 13R system, like we do in our R2 buildings, and that would be one system, one riser, sprinkler heads throughout, good standard. But if we're doing individual ownership, then they have to be a standalone system, and that's when we get into the 13Ds. And that's typically for your 1 and 2 family, like we do in a townhouse or something similar.
And
So
if you
just
do,
to kind of throw that out there.
yeah, and if you do that, Mike, then the question comes up: can you use a 13D in stacked flats?
Yeah, and that I haven't seen before. We've done it in the townhouses, and as you know, it's absolutely no issue. You get a trade-off with the fire separation in between the units. Yeah, so this is going to be fun on the fire protection side, and more than anything on the maintenance side. Obviously, with the single ownership, the 13D systems maintenance is not required. It's set it and forget it unless they're doing a stagnated system where they're using a backflow. The 13R, if it's a property management, then we're working with the property management folks in the annual inspection world and working through them, and it's not an issue. So just kind of some food for thought for how we're putting it together for the fire protection.
Angela, can you respond? I think that your hand went up to those
Well,
questions.
Yeah, I mean, the building code doesn't address ownership at all, anywhere, at all. And you can have an R2, you could have an R2 with 300 units that are all individual ownership. It's all an after the fact, whatever. So this wouldn't be any different than any other R2 in that it is what it is. We don't, a condo is a form of ownership and it's not defined. So it's kind of, yeah. It's
Yeah,
one of
no.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally get it. Condo came in, I think, last year, and that was something I know, at least on the Wasm side, we had some heartache with because of the maintenance aspect. So for us, we definitely want to help find the solution. But once building, planning, and all the other MEP folks sign off the C of O, then it moves to the fire marshal world to where we're in charge of the maintenance and making sure the systems are taken care of. So we really have to have that pathway for the existing maintenance on which way it goes and who we're working with. Obviously, our right of entry doesn't always extend into the single family ownership. So that's where we moved to that 13D individualized system. But if it is a commercial property, typically bid out of the IBC, so an R2 property, then it's a 13R system. We're working with property management. State of Washington already gives us right of entry, so it's all taken care of. So again, really just kind of food for thought. This is thinking about the building into the existing environment and into the future, how we take care of it to make sure those systems are maintained safe for those occupants.
Right, but so even when something is condoed like this, then, and you have individual owners, you're required to have a condo association or a homeowners association, because that dictates, that takes care of all common use areas and ownership issues, especially since property lines don't go to ground. So it would be the same thing as dealing with a management firm as far as that goes, because because I mean, they build these as apartments down the line. Yeah, they can condoize them. I mean, state law puts some pretty solid restrictions on, zoning codes and things like that. Can't tell you can't, as long as you're meeting, stuff. So again, it's not the same as like with a single family where you own, ground to sky or whatever. You do still have an association that's required to be with it, that is a group that you can go through as far as that. So I mean, that's one thing in there.
No, appreciate that. So that would definitely mitigate the concern, and then the 13R would be appropriate. So that's perfect. That's why I needed it. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all part of the condoization RCW.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, you were next, I think.
Yeah, this is Hoyt Jeter, principal engineer, City of Tacoma. One thing something that was brought up to John a second ago about where you could calculate the rating and stuff. I think that's more under the IBC for the design professional to do. I actually think, in my experience, even on commercial, sometimes it gets done incorrectly. I kind of would like to keep it like John had, where it's actually a UL assembly that has all the pictures, exactly how it's going to be built. The IBC is not as clear with pictures and how to do it. It's a lot with words, and I think that gets missed more. So just to get back to what John have, I don't know if we should really change where you could calculate the rating of the assembly in a prescriptive method of design. So.
Shweta?
Yeah, I guess my question is like a larger one, and I don't know if I missed it during the earlier part of this meeting, but what is the thought behind no common use areas?
Simplicity and
I'm
a
sorry?
simplicity and a prescriptive design.
I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I mean, with the legislation, we were told to use basically what we could out of the IRC. We could add things like that in. It was just a matter of keep it more of a cookie cutter prescriptive. But again, I mean, it can be added in. That was just the first run at it. So yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking that even if, if it was just 6 units, you could still keep the rating, keep the 1 hour rating around those areas as well, and propose that in one of the units. Say you were doing a co-housing situation or something like that. You could make one a common use space, and it would be good for that community. So something to think about.
And in all honesty, it was also going along without having internal circulation areas. If we're gonna now add those back in, that does make it easier to say add a laundry room or something like that. So yeah.
Ardell.
I absolutely agree. Like the zoning is going to tell you you have to have an amenity space, but I think the question is, again, when you're bringing it into the residential code and the simplicity of it, is the idea to bring multiple occupancies into the residential code. And if you want to bring other occupancies into the residential code, is, like Angela said, like, yeah, the answer is just for simplicity, but it's also what's the scoping and intent of this legislation. So I think it's just, where do you draw the line? Is what, by bringing in an apartment building into the residential code, are you bringing the apartment occupancies, or are you bringing, you know, what an apartment building looks like in the most flexible of legislation of zoning and what that prototype is. So I think that's beyond the scope personally of this tag, and I would urge to keep it at the residential occupancy as a start, and then tackle the other occupancies, including where occupancies can be located over the height of a building, to a later discussion.
And I would agree with that, particularly given the comments that we had from Representative Dewar. Is it, she wants it to be simple. That's, so let's keep it simple, but bring, allow people to build 6 stories. It's meant to be residential, and so to go from this in the residential code, if you need to start adding other things, you can just go to the building code. That's pretty straightforward of where we draw the line, in my opinion. But Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess one consideration that is maybe similar to the laundry room issue. I know there are some communities around the state, Spokane is one of them, where we do have requirements for indoor bike parking, which I think would based on this discussion, would be considered a common use. Obviously, on the zoning side, we have the ability to change that if there's some issue in the building code, but I wanted to make sure we're thinking about that if we are going to be prohibiting those common uses. There may be requirements under zoning that go along with a building of this nature that we would effectively be making it impossible to build. So there may need to be some kind of consideration for common areas, and I'm not sure exactly what that looks like.
I'm just going to ask Angela and was it Jonathan that worked on the original proposal? So we are going to have to do we're going to have to figure out how to include interior corridors or exiting right into this.
Right.
I think if there have been a couple of questions about the common use, if we think we can maybe think about that item number 2 that's on the screen, and think, put some thoughtful proposal in there. Then, the next pass, we can kind of think about bike parking as one. I think that on one hand, I want to keep it simple. I think that there are some things like laundry rooms and bike parking that we might want to try to include in this. So, okay. John, I think.
Yeah, I did have, just as further thoughts for us to consider how many other what I would call accessory spaces do we want to start throwing in there, because some of them have different risks or hazards, right? If we want to try to accommodate a trash room, trash collection room, then that's another thing, right? Do we want to start thinking about trash chutes, and things like that? Then you're starting to get again to the more complexity, and that's part of what again, part of this discussion about what common spaces do we want to say are okay and which ones maybe we say you can't have.
Yeah.
But a lot of places require trash collection, right, to be somewhere. And I think, well, I don't know if they're required to be in the building, but they got to reside somewhere. So that could be an issue as well. And then once you do that, and I'll have to ask my fire colleagues, the implications. If you start having these common use areas, then I think you are driven to a 13R system. Would I be correct in that?
Yeah, you got it, John. So the 13R would be appropriate with any of the common use. Just coming out of the cities, and since we got Seattle, Spokane, I came out of City of Raleigh on the East Coast. The majority of my apartment buildings or all my apartment buildings were obviously 13R. The majority of them had a common use laundry. Some of them even went as far to have like a vending section or whatnot. And some of the newer ones that were built, give or take 2010, and again, a different building code version. But 2010 even went as far as to have places for bicycles and mopeds and all the other micro mobility that started becoming so popular. So you're 100% right with the 13R on that application.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You did make me think of one other thing when you started talking about mopeds and things like that. We're gonna have to deal with ESS.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's here.
Lithium-ion batteries.
ESS is remind me.
Electrical storage systems.
Okay. Okay. Other comments? I think that we need to have, so did we decide that the 13R is correct and proper? Is that, so in the comment, if we did accommodate a common use area of certain types, we already have a 13R sprinkler system, right? So that is one plus for that. Todd, go ahead.
I was reviewing earlier the ICC process on single exit earlier, and that question of no outlets for micromobility. Is that, John or Mike, is that what the concern is? Is that now that introduces the lithium batteries in there? So then they had the 13R system, but in that case, they were acquiring the 13 sprinkler locations in addition, right? Is that because of those batteries? Or simply the having the clutter of those things in the egress?
Yeah, I'm sorry, John, go for it.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to tell him I'm not 100% sure on that one because you're kind of juggling IRC versus IBC in this case. Obviously, the IRC or residential code, we're funneling more towards the 13D, and that's the 1 and 2 family ownership. This again is kind of taking that IBC building and putting it into the IRC. So what do? The higher standard between the two is going to be that 13R. And more than anything, that's just density of water flow, what the actual sprinkler head's capable of. And the area is required. Your 13D only requires living space. The 13R goes above and beyond and puts into the common spaces that John and some of the other folks brought up. As far as lithium-ion batteries, and now I'm putting on the fire investigator hat, they're everywhere. They're in your cell phones, they're in your boom boxes and radios. It really doesn't matter if it's micro-mobility or a cell phone or a vape pen or whatnot. We're going to those.
Okay. The reason I brought that up is in the committee's remarks, it specifically called out no electrical outlets to avoid that micro-mobility charging. I just thought that was curious.
I wasn't a part of that, so I couldn't speak to that comment then.
Yeah, I suspect it's all, there's been a lot of conversations in the last couple of cycles at the national level about, these batteries and the hazards and things, and people taking them, it's a business where they'll collect up your scooters and then take them home and charge them, right? And how many of those can you have plugged in and where do they go and things like that. I was just remarking on the ESS because of Mike's comment about, well, okay, we got this bike parking. Now, people are going to have electric bikes. They're going to have scooters. They're going to have all these other things. And it's not necessarily that nothing can be done about it, but we just need to realize that as we open it up to those things, there may be some additional things we need to think about, at least.
Angela, go ahead.
I was just going to say the outlets and the stairwells are also because you're not supposed to store things in there. So whether whether the batteries were an issue or not, it's still, you're not supposed to put your bikes in there and things like that because it blocks the exit. So, yeah.
Okay. I think in general, we're going to want to keep away from accessory uses. Is that the right term?
Common use areas.
Common use areas, thank you. But I also am, we may not be able to completely, so let's continue to work on that. Marcus?
Sorry, as you were trying to go to the next step, just the last thought that I thought there, I kind of agree with the limiting or focusing kind of on the residential uses to keep the code generally simple, and that's kind of the highest priority in terms of, in my opinion, is getting people housed or finding ways to construct housing at a lower cost. And there are ways in the zoning code or things to do, like you can do a bike park or in your backyard type of thing. So you can do a separate accessory building that's bike parking, or you can do your garbage in a separate way that doesn't necessarily need to be treated as an IBC apartment building, since these are meant to be kind of smaller buildings with less units, lower occupancy type of thing. And so I feel like there's probably other ways to get around some of those things while also treating this housing type in the IRC different from kind of the bigger apartment buildings.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. Spencer?
Yeah, I guess also raises the question of vehicle parking, especially if it's enclosed in a garage, and whether that would also need to be considered here. Just something I thought of as we were talking about these common use areas.
Angela?
These buildings do not include garages. That would be an S occupancy, and it would be mixed. It has all sorts of separations, ventilations, all sorts of other requirements. So these were not intended to be above, at least this proposal was not meant to be over a garage or attached to a garage. It can be a separate IBC structure or ground parking, but not inside parking.
And private parking garages for individual units is, you have to have, you can do that in a townhouse under the code right now. But these are, again, different. So one could, well, I'll stop there.
So John, your comment raised a question for me. As we've talked about it now, after my clarity that we're talking 3 stories.
Mhm.
We also are thinking the other, I believe the other one is that the RCW wants us to look at is it going to 6 townhouse units? Or is that already included?
Townhouse units, you can build as many as you want.
Okay, okay. So
Up
my
to the zoning code.
well, and that's under the building code?
Under the building code, there's no limit on how many townhouses.
That's the residential code. Under the residential code, there's
Sorry,
no.
residential code, yes.
Okay, okay. All right. Well, I'm not that well versed in the residential code either, so I'm trying to understand the difference. Okay. So the next steps, we've got 50 minutes left. What I would actually suggest is that I would call for a motion to approve John's edits. What term did you use?
Revisions.
Revisions, yeah, but we know that we may revisit. Provisionally, yeah, provisionally approve those. Because what I would really like us to get to is, and Dustin, what I would call this is call it R1 or R2, I guess, the original one being R1, but this becomes the working document revision 2. So we accept these changes, we continue to work. So that's what I would like us to, I'd like a motion to approve that as we see it. Then I would ask everybody, the next steps are today, I want to go down to the list below and start having conversations about the questions, comments that John's raised. And I would ask everybody to go through, if you think you have ideas about any of the sections, whether it's the sprinkler system, our whatever, do exactly what John did. Make an edit to it, submit it to us, And you know, you'll be allowed to present it. Here's why I think we should change the automatic sprinkler system or whatever it is. So that's the path forward. 3 steps. Let's approve this as revision 2. Let's continue the conversation for the next 50 minutes on the topics down below. And then I also would, Angela, you're going to work on incorporating the corridor framing, right? That'll be probably our main version that we do at our next meeting, is to walk through those modifications.
Yeah, I can try to put together something for corridors and stairs.
Okay. Richard, go ahead.
Roger, do you want a motion now for this?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to use this document as a baseline.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, John, thanks. Is there any other comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we're making progress. So Dustin, if you can go down and page down to the comments at the bottom. I think I would like to have a discussion about the 8,000, his first general comment, multiple buildings. We started this conversation at one of our other meetings. I know that there has been, I've heard people suggest that we want to put 2 or 3, whatever the number is. We don't want them to just be the 6 necessarily. And I believe that it was even a question about, you know, you have one larger property, and you can put 3 or 4 of these together. And so, is there a question or concern about stacking them together? And/or does there need to be a separation? If we put them together structurally, what is the fire rating between them? Richard, Mike, I think your hand was up first.
Mike was first.
Okay, yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, that was unintentional hand raise.
Oh, you just have your button clicked, hovering over it, right? Okay, go ahead, Richard.
Hey, apologies if I missed this per the discussion about the legislation. I know we've discussed sprinklers at length here. Is the idea of possibly not sprinklering one of these buildings still on the table?
I think anything is on the table.
Okay. I only bring that up is because my concern would come in if you started to add multiples on a site. I'd be more concerned. I'd be interested in that topic more about if we start talking about this.
It's where, I mean, I going back to the sprinkler conversation, I believe we've all arrived at 13R. That does seem like the simple solution. But I also know everything that we pass, we have to come back and look at, is that a big cost driver, and are there other ways that we can do it, provide the safety? So I think we need to keep it on the table, and that's exactly why we did it as a provisional approval of this version. So, Angela.
Yeah, so one thing she mentioned, that she understood that sprinklers, were a requirement. She did also mention, though, that she was intrigued by something that Marcus has his hand up, but she mentioned something from his proposal where instead of sprinklers, you have 2-hour separations instead. So she wouldn't mind seeing options, but she wasn't basically saying no sprinklers either. But again, like to Rich's point, especially as you start getting more and more buildings together, you're going to need to really take that into account, the higher possibilities. So, I mean, I'm still a sprinkler advocate for it.
Okay, Hoyt, you were up first and then Marcus.
Hoyt Jeter, Principal Engineer, City of Tacoma. The other things about attaching multiple buildings, I think you start having problems with accessibility issues. When you start having to have these in jurisdictions, when you have to meet the accessibility requirements, which is in the IBC, and you wouldn't be in there. So I really, at this time, I wouldn't be hopefully you wouldn't support this with multiple buildings for these type of structures for what you're doing at this time. Maybe in the future, but at this time, I would, hopefully you would stay away from that, from attaching all the multiple. In addition to that, you start increasing the mass a little bit more and how your lateral loads are going to be transferred. If that's really going to be addressed well enough, if you don't have seismic gaps or they banging up against each other or however they're built. I think it gets a little more complicated when you start attaching multiple buildings to a building, and I don't believe it should be in the prescriptive method right now.
Okay, Marcus.
Yeah, so I'm somebody that thinks they should have allowance to be able to be attached to each other. I think one, we do have there is accessibility language within this baseline document, so I think that would cover the accessibility concerns, especially once you get to 4 units or above. And in my first proposal, I had an idea essentially where it was, attached units. I think one way you could think about doing this is up to a certain number of units, right? So you might want to get to 6 units, there might be a variation of this where you don't do a individual building that is 6 units, but you do 2 triplexes that are attached to each other to get 6 units. And I think you want to allow for situations where where there may be somebody from a design perspective, building housing wants to do some type of variation of development rather than just doing an individual building that's up to 6 units and do different things to get around that way. And on the topic of sprinklers, in my original proposal, I do think, or I would like to make an argument for a situation where you don't have to sprinkler the building if you do, for instance, 2-hour fire rated protection between each of the units for walls and floors. But even in my original proposal, I was only proposing that as a situation that would apply for one detached building and not something that you could do throughout multiple attached buildings, if that makes sense, right? So if you did an individual 6-plex and all of the units are separated 2 hours, then you didn't necessarily have to do sprinklers. But if you wanted to do 2 attached 6-plexes, you would have to do sprinklers, is essentially an idea that I had proposed in kind of my original proposal. So that's some ideas out there for how to I guess think about this, or if you're going at different options and stuff like that.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, cool, thanks. So obviously sprinklers came up, so the fire guy is obligated to make a comment at this point. Just real quick, so if it ever gets into a cost consideration for any of y'all, we got some really good quick facts that we can share. And needless to say, every contractor is different, every application is a little bit different, but we're looking at 90 cents a square foot for sprinklers to be installed. And again, I can share that with the group or any one-on-ones that are needed. When we talk about fire-rated construction, it's a known fact that I've never seen a wall actually put out a fire. Fire-rated construction is just one part of the fire and life safety ecosystem that prevents the spread or slows the spread, but it doesn't actually deal with the issue. So when you're looking at it, even from a medical side of signs versus symptoms or treating root cause, a sprinkler is always going to be your root cause of putting the fire out or keeping the fire at bay to allow egress. So while fire-rated construction helps, it's just one part of the system, and they really go synergistically together to where you need the fire-rated construction, and we're allowed to offer that trade up a reduced level. I know John and some other folks have brought it up, but you're actually allowed to go from the 2 and 3 hour walls or partitions down to a 1 hour when sprinklers are installed. If we take sprinklers out of this equation, that makes it really hard for the fire community to be okay with a lot of the trade ups we're talking about, or really taking what's an R2 and bringing it into the residential building world. So that really becomes more of the slippery slope. So just a little bit of food for thought for everybody. And again, any information that anyone on the group needs, especially on the cost related side, we're more than happy to provide to anyone, so you have some consideration.
Thanks, Mike. Richard?
And just to go back on and discuss the accessibility that Hoyt brought up, currently the IRC points you to R3 occupancy provisions for accessibility, but this proposal, I believe it's section C105.
105.1.
105.1 puts you to R2 provisions. So you wouldn't lose the type A requirements for that if you had multiple buildings and more than 10 units on a site. That was
Okay. Rich?
Yeah, thanks. Rich with Rub and Fire. I think to kind of echo what Mike was saying, the residential fire sprinklers are really kind of help us preserve that existing housing stock. We've had a residential sprinkler since 2007, and it's been really successful for those common cooking type fires that we're seeing a huge increase in. And I think by far the most affordable housing is the housing that's already built. And we're seeing that older housing stock that is sprinklered not being destroyed by fire, which means it can be maintained to occupancy as we go through the life of the building. I think something else to consider when we're talking about sprinklers or not sprinklers, especially when we're talking about stacks of flats instead of townhouses, is the verticality of the risk. You're starting to put people above other people, and you can't control the people below you and what they do. And the most common spread of fire is from a lower level of a building to an upper level of a building as it comes out the windows, comes out the doors, and spreads up and up into the attic spaces and the units above. So sprinklers are really helping to protect those families that are above. And it's a relatively small cost to do an awful lot of protection and continuity of occupancy of existing buildings. So.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Jonathan?
So yeah, one of my intents behind requiring the sprinklers was the increased occupancy density of these and stacking one unit on top of another and vertical egress, giving more time for that vertical egress to happen. Then another thing I was looking at with putting multiple of these buildings on a property, it's already, your exterior wall table already gives you differences in your separations. And then as far as adding a 2-hour wall to get rid of sprinklers, at that point, you might as well just be building townhouses, because you can already do that with a 2-hour separation, no sprinklers up to, I believe it's 5 units. So those are a few of my intents behind the portion that I wrote.
Okay, Marcus?
Okay. Mike, I just wanted to say, I would love to get, if you have the financial kind of cost data on sprinklers in the state of Washington, if that's what you're referencing, because something that I put into, I found, I had some research on a cost benefit analysis on residential code sprinklers in single family and townhouse buildings, and it was a study that I cited within my original proposal, and the numbers that they were showing there in that cost benefit analysis was $675 per square feet. So much higher, kind of ranging between, something that is 6 units, a building that is, if you take a 8,000 square foot building at that cost, you're looking at $54,000 of added cost to construction of that building, just from the sprinklers alone. And that's assuming assuming a 13D sprinkler system, since that's a study was using single family and townhouse buildings. So a 13R system, I imagine, would be more costly than that. So that'd be great to get a comparison of that, or if you have some updated stats in the state of Washington, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I think that I would urge the two of you to kind of take a look at those numbers. I think cost is something we need to be thinking about. And I will just jump in here, and I don't know if Sherry is still on, but the energy code, kind of as an aside, the energy code in the conversations through the energy code tag for a multiplex building, there are varying opinions as to whether the commercial energy code or the residential energy code would be more cost effective, which is why the proposal right now is to allow options. You can do either one. So,
That's correct.
whereas it's certainly my assumption that a commercial energy code solution would be more expensive, that may not always be the case. So, Sherry, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, that was part of the discussion, was that we would leave it up to whoever was developing the structure, the buildings, to decide what made the most sense to do in that particular scenario. And so that was one of the reasons to just leave it as a choice.
So on the one hand, with the sprinklers, there's a safety issue, but there's also a cost, and so let's drill down into that and have that conversation. And I think Marcus and Mike, I think that would be.
If it's okay, I'll just jump in and say I recently had in West Seattle budgets drawn up for a 13D system in a stacked duplex. And I don't know that I would know what I want to say that the square footage cost is probably $6 or $7 a square foot for it. But the total cost was averaging around $15,000. Just as an aside for FYI.
Well, I think the more information we have, I mean, it is if the cost is neutral, I think the sprinklers would make sense. If they really are, this is my personal opinion, if there is a cost difference, would there be a way in certain situations to allow options? I don't know. Spencer.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And just one more voice saying what I'm hearing is that costs are significantly higher for sprinklers. So I guess it would be helpful to just see the full picture and get as much data as we can about that, so we can make an informed decision. The other thing, we've kind of danced around it and addressed it tangentially a few times in prior meetings, but I think we're back to the question of what's our risk profile here, and are we focused on preservation of property or life safety? I'm pretty strongly in the camp of focusing on life safety, and we probably need to be okay with property, potentially being destroyed in a fire, given the cost concerns that I think we're supposed to be addressing. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Spencer. Okay. I do not see any additional hands up. So that was a long discussion about, it started off with attaching buildings. I would still like us to consider, maybe it is only 2, but I think that I would like us to consider options for only 2. And then if you go down to the bottom, John's specific comment is the origin of the 8,000 square feet. Do we want to, I know there was a comment that somebody made about, well, is this 10,000 square foot units? And I don't think anybody is thinking that. But what is the origin of 8,000 square feet? And John, if I may be, my assumption right now, the 8,000 square feet, we're talking about 3 levels of 2 units, right? And so that would be, at 8,000 square feet would be, if I can find my calculator. I'm an engineer, so I never do math.
A little over 1,300.
Thank you. Yeah. Is that a valid number, or should it be 10,000 square feet? You know, the the current market drive is to push those areas of apartments down, smaller and smaller. Although I know the question that I get asked as we're involved in developments of residential is what are the families going to do? You know, you can only have a certain number of studio and 1-bedroom apartments. So comments on the 8,000 square feet, Jonathan?
So I figured the 8,000 square feet at looking what was the most, some studies, what was the most looked for apartment was a 3-bedroom. The average 3 bedrooms, 1,200 square feet. 1,200 times 6 is 7,200, and just rounded up to 8,000. That's where the number came from.
Okay, thank you. John?
Okay, no, that helps answer where that came from. Presumably you're gonna have to add a little bit for common areas for exiting and things like that. So maybe that helps accommodate some of that. The reason I asked the question was because if you go to the building code for this type of construction, which is could be what we call type, well, I can't remember if we limited the type of construction here. But the type of construction could be non-rated construction, what we call type 5N, 5B, sorry, old code. I'm still trying to figure that out. And there are some limitations on the area in that, depending on whether you sprinkler, depending on other things. And it starts off with a base of 7,000 square feet per floor, and then you can do various things. So that's why I asked the question.
Okay. Todd?
So back to the single exit in the ICC level, there's a lot in the commentary about connecting square feet, kind of correlating square feet with occupancy numbers per floor. Is anyone thinking that way and can kind of communicate what they're thinking?
Apparently not.
Not sure what the question was.
Thank you. Well, John, I can send it around if you want, but in the ICC committee or in the proposals, there was a lot of discussion about 2,000 square feet was correlated with 10 occupants per floor and that kind of thing. 6,000 was 20. So they were trying to essentially establish risk based on occupancy count. Also, it appeared.
Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a thought that relates to something you said previously, but maybe relates to this as well. And that is, you've talked about combining buildings. And I'm wondering if maybe there's just if the combining of buildings is just subject to the same unit cap. In other words, if you have like 3 up-down duplexes that you're stringing together, or 2 triplexes that you're putting together, the important thing is that you're capping the number of units. And I think when we talk about the square footage cap, I guess I'm thinking in similar terms. Is there a need for a square footage cap if we're already limiting to 6 units? Isn't there going to be kind of a natural cap to the size of the building? And are there already caps in the IRC for building size or something like that? I'm not aware of that. So I guess I just wanted to understand if there's somewhere else that the code is kind of addressing that question.
John, your hand is up on my screen next, and you shook your head, so.
Yeah, no, there's nothing, there's no limits on area in the IRC. There are for apartments in the IBC, and I think that's part of what we're trying to translate here. In answer to Todd's question, those occupant load numbers are based on what they call occupant load factors, which how we calculate what's needed for exiting. Your capacity of your exits is based on, for apartments, it's whatever it was, 200 per, square foot per person. And you use that, then you calculate an occupant load, then you figure out how much width you need and some other things. When do you trigger, wider corridors and things like that. So that's what those numbers are about. It's not necessarily, I don't know, a direct tie, but it's a way of looking at how big can these things be.
Okay. Richard Williams.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the square footage cap is, was intended to do what I'm suggesting here, but I like the idea of creating a classification of building that limits the square footage, that, assuming we can get through zoning issues, reduces or limits, the common use areas. It creates just a different classification of building geared toward a specific purpose. Because, if you get anything larger than this, if you want to start expanding and getting, trash areas, bike areas, amenity spaces, you can build this building out of the IBC currently. And I guess I would be interested in coming up with these thresholds that kind of separate you from the IBC and point you in the direction of building a building like this for a specific purpose.
Okay.
Which is cost efficiency, and I get all that. So
I'll just put out there, I would, in my brain, I still would like us to be able to have an option to do 2 6-unit, 8,000 square foot that are back to back with a firewall down the middle. It just opens up a lot of opportunities, I think, for developers to look at different properties and what can work. But anyway, that's my personal opinion. Rich, would you, being somebody whose last name gets mispronounced often, can you tell me how to pronounce your last name? You're on mute.
Yeah, it's Geese, Key.
Gieske?
Yep.
Okay, I'll try my best.
No, you're good. I don't take offense when people mispronounce it. I guess 2 things, from the fire standpoint, water and access are kind of our 2 key pieces. And so one of the limiting factors on these can also be available fire flow that's available in the municipal water supply where these things are going to be constructed. And I'm assuming, since we're talking the IRC and we're also at the same time talking middle housing in the state, 6 units is kind of matching nicely with the middle housing codes as well. But when we start talking about residential areas of, municipal areas or cities or jurisdictions, typically those are designed to a lower design criteria for water supply than the commercial zones are. So might be something to consider as well as another limiting factor.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Marcus?
Thanks. To Spencer's question, I just wanted to kind of give at least some of my thoughts on it in terms of the 8,000 square foot. I think that's similar to what I think maybe Richard was saying. I think it's probably a good number in the sense that you create this dividing line between, the IRC code and the IBC code, or for this, a similar type of building. And if you want to do something that's bigger, then you go back to the IBC. And I think the 8,000 square feet, just from like a zoning perspective and kind of in my professional work, seeing what codes have been happening due to HB 1110, the middle housing stuff. Like, I think you're not seeing too many codes that are going to allow buildings that are larger, or their zoning is not going to allow something that's larger than 8,000 square feet for the most part, based off of the codes that I'm seeing in like Seattle. Spencer, you know better than me if Spokane would allow something, if you could get up to 8,000 in Spokane on something like this within these parameters. But I think for the most part, it's going to be a lot of buildings in that, like, 5,000, 6,000. If you're getting up to 6 units, 7,000 range, and then some space for circulation, giving that space for the circulation at the 8,000 square feet.
Okay, Angela.
Yeah, the intent of the legislature is to create housing stock to try to get more people off the street. So it's not meant to build mega buildings that, are 3 stories, 6 units, each unit's a 3,000 square foot condo, multi-million dollars, which is absolutely can happen, trust me. And so that's not the intent of this. So I think, again, this is intended to be a prescriptive, more simplistic way to get stock out there. And so I think by doing this, in a smaller version, I think that is what the intent is.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like there's a pretty good comfort level with the $8,000 square foot number. I think the attaching building to building, I guess, Marcus, if you're interested in it or supportive of it, you know, given some of the comments, is there language we could introduce to how, what would it look like given what we have to accommodate that? So if you could maybe take a stab at that and we can have a discussion at our next meeting.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay. I'm actually I'm looking at the general comments of John, that John put down, the structural issues. I would like to take a little bit of time to look at those. So I'm gonna ask that we jump over those at this point, and I'll try to dig into it a little bit and see what I think. Soundproof. The third bullet item on the general comments. I do want to remind everybody, sorry, I'm going to dig something up here. Well, you know what I pulled out was the building code and not the residential code. But it is safety, public health, and general welfare. So the code, and that actually might be in the language of the RCW as well. So, you know, the general welfare is one that I don't want us to forget about. I think life safety, when we're talking about varying levels of, you know, what are we designed to? I think that life safety is the right choice, but it is also general welfare. Maybe it's not in this one. That's one of the things as they write the different RCWs, they don't always use the same language, but
Says public health and safety.
okay. Yeah. So you can argue that sound is public health, but maybe not. Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, just my general comments or thoughts on soundproofing. As one of our code officials likes to remind me, if your builder says he builds to the code, run away. It seems like we want to be focused on the bare minimum and let individual builders determine how they want to deal with soundproofing. So my preference would be not to address it unless there's really an actual safety component.
Okay, wait.
Yeah, I actually disagree with that. I think you should have an STC rating that actually in for these, like you would in the building code. When you start putting multiple units together like this, there should be some kind of sound. I mean, we're already pulling other stuff out of the IBC. It just makes sense to have a specific STC rating between these units as a minimum part of the code for the IRC. IRC was typically made kind of for very prescriptive methods. And in this situation, you're putting a lot of, you know, you're increasing this, and maybe later on you could take it out. But I think if you're trying to meet the IBC, you might as well start meeting the IBC in all of it. At least I would also recommend putting the STC rating in there. So it's easy to meet.
Oh, so go ahead. Read on height. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying it's easy to meet the STC rating, especially when you start putting plumbing through there, you know, hearing the plumbing going through. So I think it should be put in.
Marcus, go ahead.
I was going to agree with Spencer in terms of not necessarily addressing it as a requirement of the update here. I think to kind of respond to what Hoyt just said in terms of I mean, the legislation is to pull this into the IRC. So we want to treat it more similarly to an IRC building than an IBC building, and kind of in some ways is how I think about it, even though I guess it's a hybrid. So you always have to pick between those two things, but it's not pulling an IBC building and keeping IBC traits within an IRC code. It's, you know, treating this smaller multiplex multifamily building fairly similar to the IRC stuff. And I think, as was probably mentioned, there's currently a sound transmission appendix, right? Currently in the IRC, AK, appendix AK sound transmission is, I think, maybe what that would be referring to. And so, your local jurisdiction then, right, would have the opportunity to adopt that if that's something that they care more deeply about than somebody at the baseline does.
John?
Just respond to that very quickly. Actually, the local jurisdictions would not be able to adopt that unless specifically allowed by the SBCC. There's state legislation out there that says basically you can't amend the code that affects what they call multifamily housing, which is 1 to 4 dwelling units, and with some other restrictions on that. So, so yes, no, we'd have to give them specific authority to adopt that if they want to. So in order to make that happen, I guess I would also say, livability is going to be an issue too. If you're trying to sleep while someone's tap dancing upstairs, that's kind of a problem for the people downstairs. Even just little kids running across the floor. Do we really want to make these so that there's going to be complaints, about that? And we already, well, it is a livability issue, and it can affect health, mental health as well. So that's why they put it in there. There's a lot of moves to do that. So I'll just throw it out there. I'm not advocating in some ways for one or the other, but I do think it is something that we should not just dismiss.
Other comments? I agree with everything that everybody said. So, which means that I'm full on both sides of the fence. I'm not sure. For me, is what would the added cost be, I guess, but at the same time, should we let that be a market-driven question? I'm not sure where I land on that. Sherry, go ahead.
I just wanted to offer that when I've done a lot of conversion of spaces to create ADUs and things like that for people who are going to own both units, it's been very, very important to people to have some kind of soundproofing between units, and have somebody, and as someone who's lived in a lot of very old apartment buildings as a renter, I would also agree that soundproofing is really, really important. And at the same time, and I feel conflicted because I also want things to be less expensive to build. And so I think at least allowing a jurisdiction to point towards STC ratings in an appendix, to me, would be kind of the minimum on this, and potentially considering at least some minimal STC ratings between units. Thank you.
Spencer?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for me to hear from potentially from others in the building community that may be on the call here, just to understand. I mean, for me, it's really a question about cost. That's really what the legislature seems to be pointing to here, is making sure that this housing type can be built affordably. So if there really are solutions for sound transmission that are extremely low cost, and it's really just making sure that it's part of the design process, I don't have a lot of concerns there. And I guess I just want to hear more about what those potential costs are and whether that's become a challenge for people in the past.
Okay. Jonathan.
So looking at the residential energy code, if we follow the insulation guidelines in there of, like 2x6 wall with R21 fiberglass, we're going to get an STC of about 35, which is 10 points below would be required by Appendix AK if it was adopted. So on the floor, we're looking at thicker insulation with a little more soundproofing. So inherently, we're going to have some soundproofing built in just by following the state energy code.
Okay, good point. And is that a minimum enough? And I'm not sure. John?
Yeah, I got a question since I haven't been in actually plan review for ages. So, so the energy code, does it require insulation between units? So in the stack flat, or the 2 over 3 over whatever it is, stacked 3, 3 stacks of 2, whatever, however we want to call that. Does it require the floors between the units to be soundproof, because that ordinarily that would not be part of the exterior envelope, right? So that's kind of a question.
So if we're looking at these out of the residential energy code, each dwelling unit's going to have to meet it, just like in a duplex, we stack a duplex on top of each other. So each unit's going to have the floor insulation in it.
Yeah, for the residential energy code, you do your calculations per unit, not the building as a whole. Correct, Jonathan?
Correct. It'd be each unit.
Okay. So the other thing that might then be the consequence of this is a lot of, at least when I was doing plan review ages ago, a lot of these sound assemblies have what they call resilient channels to mount the wallboard or the ceiling sheetrock on, and that isolates it from the vibrations and things like that. So that helps attenuate the noise and things like that. So there's some of that, and I don't know what, that was obviously standard construction for apartment buildings. So I don't know what the costs are, but that's one of the things you would probably have to add to whatever the energy code requires.
Okay. Shweta?
To John's point, resilient channels are what we use pretty typically. And I would imagine that that's not super expensive to add to your assembly. And I would agree with Sherry that we should consider at least that minimum 50 or whatever is required between units, because lots of people living together, that can be a lot of sound. So it is a mental health issue.
Can I ask some of the architects on the call to put together a summary of the sound transmission based on the energy code? I think Jonathan maybe said it was an STC of 30, so you're 10 below what would be. So maybe at the next meeting, could somebody kind of present, all right, here's a 3-level 6-plex. Here's what the energy code would require for insulation, and so here's the corresponding STC ratio. I think it would be good. I'm back and forth. Eventually I'd like to understand what, if it's a 30, given what the energy codes would require, what would it take to get to a 50? Or to a 40, or, so just in your typical case. John?
Yeah, just for information, I just looked it up in the 2024 IRC, the base code. It's Appendix BG, which is what I had in the notes there, and it requires a impact insulation class, so an IIC rating of 45, or a impact sound rating NISR of 42. So that it doesn't have an STC rating per se, which is more about if you got someone yelling on one side of the wall, do you hear it on the other side? The building code would require the STC, a sound transmission class of 50. That does not seem to be required in this appendix, and the question is then, do we add it? But right now it's all about impact rating, and so It's again, it's like people walking on a tile floor. How much of that goes through to the space below?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sorry, the appendix just deals with structural borne sound. Oh, it does have airborne, excuse me. Okay, I'm misread that. Okay, it's got both airborne and structural borne. And so, yes, it does have STC, but it's also 45.
Okay. Well, if I could get somebody, Shweta and Marcus, if we could kind of get a summary of what's the 24 IRC or 2024 IRC and or the 2024 residential energy code. What if you build it to that, what would the sound ratings be? And where does that compare to what the IBC would require? I think that's a good conversation for us to take a look at and have. So we have 5 minutes left. I think that I'm gonna go ahead and pause or stop the meeting. I think that there are some additional good questions that John raises. I know at the next meeting, we are going to have Angela and Jonathan are going to pull together, try to work in some interior exiting requirements. I know there was just the conversation we had about the sound ratings, and then Marcus, if you wanted to put together some information about what it would look like to put two of these together. I think that'll be 3 chunks of work for us to do and hopefully get through. Okay. I am going on to agenda item, it's the number 6, which is other business. And the only other business that I'm aware of is we need to get the meetings on the schedule. And I had kind of implied at our last meeting that we would go to every other week on Tuesday at this time. So that would be the next meeting being the 29th of July. Every other Tuesday, does that work for the majority of folks on the call? Or raise your hand or voice your message. That works for Mike and John. I am just going to, Richard, go ahead.
Oh, no, just raising my hand works.
Yeah. I see a whole bunch of thumbs up. So I'm just going to, Dustin, let's just get on the docket every other Tuesday from 1 to 4. And I'm sensitive to Patrick's comment about how long the meetings are going to be. I do feel like we're making good progress on it. My hope is that, I don't know, I haven't even thought about how much longer it will take us. Certainly a number of meetings yet, but hopefully we can continue to drill down. I think the 8,000 square foot was a question we've identified, we got on the table. We have an understanding now of the interior exiting, so we'll work on that. I think the stacking the buildings together is a question we need to work through and get comfortable with. So I think we're making progress. Is there any other new business? All right. I will give you 3 minutes of your day back. Thank you all very much for a great meeting.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks,
Yep.
Dustin.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.